I just want to also give like a little preface to, I think, what Saraba is doing in connection to the exchange project, and I would like Zakashi to speak for a minute about Bakwa's role in all of that. So in 2015, we got a grant from the Myers Moreland Foundation to run a manuscript project. And we are interested in receiving manuscripts in both fiction and non-fiction categories. And at the end of submissions, we received about 74 fiction manuscripts and only 3 submissions for the non-fiction category. So it became very clear to us at that point that more work had to be done to encourage long-form non-fiction writing by Nigerian writers. And so we decided later that year to reframe the context in which we could work with writers who were intent on producing non-fiction manuscripts by asking for proposals and pitches instead to be followed up by the work. And this proved more successful because at the end of that we got several submissions, I think up to 30, and we kind of finalized on 5 that we commissioned to produce long-form writing. And some of the writing has already been published in our print issue and would eventually be published as ebooks. And one of the winners is Socrates Mbamalu, who is here with us. And for me, the exchange project is connected to Saraba's most important goal, which is to work with writers at the outset of their careers. And as in this case, it would involve workshops. And it has become clear to us again that it's as if our editorial mandate is becoming even more, let's say, educational. Because working with writers means that we have to think about what kind of writing they are reading and how they can work with that to develop a toolkit, I guess, that they will use for the rest of their lives. So thank you. Zakashu.
Hello, everyone. So when we launched Bakwa magazine sometime around the end of 2011, nonfiction has always been very much a cornerstone part of what we do at Bakwa. And in a way, it has always been at the back of our mind to see how we can promote the nonfiction ecosystem, particularly in Cameroon. And after we launched the short story competition last year, we actually thought about doing a non-fiction competition as well. But after a couple of conversations and actually based on the kind of submissions that we regularly receive, we actually realized that it wasn't really possible to do a non-fiction conversation without really reinforcing the structures in place, reinforcing the structures in place and making sure that the writers really know how to go about it. And the way all of this links to Nigeria and Cameroon is because there's just so much shared history that we don't know that exists between Cameroon and Nigeria. If we look at it politically, British Southern Cameroon was administered as part of Nigeria, and British Northern Cameroon actually, during the referendum, decided to join the northern part of Nigeria. And with regards to the literary shared history, the first book by an English-speaking Cameroonian to be published was a play titled I'm Vindicated by Stanky Maimo, was actually launched in 1959 in Ibadan. So that says a lot about the relationship that exists between Cameroon and Nigeria. And unfortunately, this relationship isn't really known. So it's very much within the framework of this history and narrative that we decided to work with Saraba and the Goethe-Institut for the exchange program.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do next is just have the participant read for about 2 minutes, and I've asked them to read 2 minutes on the dot and 1 or 2 paragraphs from the story that they're working on for the exchange project. So let's go to Kasha, actually, and if you can start with 1 or 2 paragraphs under 2 minutes. Thank you.
My story is titled Impossible n'est pas camerounais, which is a French phrase, highly popular phrase, just like Nigerian de Kerelas. It's called, impossible is not Cameroonian. So I'll just go to a piece in the middle. It's a piece of literary journalism. Kombi, the 11th province, 1981. The biggest plane Khmer operated in the 80s was the Boeing 747-200, which the aircraft manufacturer Boeing baptized Kombi, Combined Cargo Approach. The popularity of the Kombi grew during the 60s. The versatile plane could be used to carry either passengers as an airliner or cargo as a freighter. or cargo as a freighter. Coincidentally, Kombi means comrade in Cameroonian Pidgin English. The plane's name also depicted its friendly relationship with the Cameroonian people. Retired state journalist John Dane had been on holiday in Paris with his children when he learned about Kombi's purchase by President Ahijo. He had quickly secured flight tickets for his 3 children who had to fly back home. One of his sons, Siman Dane, a Swiss port employee, vividly remembers his flight experience on one of the first Paris-Douala Kombi trips, captained by Francois Angunu, as he stood on the ramp writing down the pushback and takeoff times of an Askai Airlines plane. The ambience on board Kombi had been infectious. He had feasted on a meal of boiled potatoes and pepper soup. The Makossa melodies of Charles Limbe, Toto Guillaume, Coty Francois, and Pierre de Moussy filtered into the aisle. However, Ekambi Briand's hit song, Cameroon Airlines, eclipsed them all. As the chatty passengers downed Cameroonian beer, the plane made its entry into the Gulf of Guinea, unveiling scenic views of the creeks and green marshlands of the Douala coast. Another classic song began thumping the plane. The shakers had sounded first, but Manu Dibango had bullied its sound away quickly, with the most vocal and the most powerful of the woodwinds, deftly soloing intricate sax notes on the jazzy beat. The melody of the raucous notes alternated swiftly, like Muhammad Ali floating on his toes before a shuffle, giving the track a very groovy tune. Manu knew how to sing with the saxophone. He finally bellowed on the song in his hoarse voice. Ho ha, Makossa brutalement civilisé. The female backup singers had already taken over with angelic singing in the Douala language until they got to the song's hook. Bienvenue, welcome to Cameroon. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Siman Dane had developed goosebumps. The gypsy passengers had oohed and wooed, marveling at the creative musical touch to the landing concept. Kombi had felt so homely even before passengers reached home. That is why Cameroonians bestowed on it an apt alias, the 11th province. The country had 10 provinces, then Kombi was the 11th. Other Cameroonians simply nicknamed Kombi Mount Cameroon, the tallest mountain in West and Central Africa.
Thank you. Yeah. So are you ready? I'm ready. I'm ready. Yeah.
July 3. The day Faye turned 18, I woke up early. I pulled on a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and headed for Bowen University Teaching Hospital's Social Service Workers Office. The outpatient clinic teemed with the sick. A tall, rotund man walked to the waiting area where I sat. He flirted with an auxiliary nurse who insisted she was married. The man hit me on the shoulder with his palm, the habit of men sharing dirty jokes. I was awaiting clearance to document Kessie Children's Home, an orphanage. I opened Toni Morrison's Beloved while I waited and repeated the title of Ife Oluwani, Lola's personal essay that I read a couple of weeks before in my head. I hope someone calls them Beloved. You were a third-year student of accounting who planned on getting a degree in law too. You would have made a fine management attorney. You were supposed to be at the social worker's office with me. I told you that I would ring you up and we would go together. Maybe you would have been sitting beside me, talking about your recent of the Badagry slave port, getting mad at the images of chains in your head. Rather, you were astride the bike, your face lowered, mapping your journey in your head. You were about a kilometer from my hostel when a car mauled down the bike on the highway. You met the tar with your head. The driver was a student returning from a party, overspeeding. They said he crossed into the oncoming lane, dodging a puddle on the road. But how was I to know this yet? I wound up in Fumi's room at sunset, and we set Faye's birthday party in motion. Faye was Fumi's sister. She was on a visit from Abeokuta. The aroma of jollof rice and fried fish filled the room. There was a game of cards, a lot of laughter, some flirting, and an abundance of death talk. We were trying to figure out the best way to die. Death by drowning or burning, Fumi asked. Drowning, please, I said. 2 boys joined the party from Oyo, and booze was added to the menu. There was food, another round of card games, and a vulgar session of truth or dare. I was getting drunk when you were dying, but how was I to know?
I admired the way she was worshipped on her own terms, how she achieved the greatest effect with mere effort. She could hijack a person's heart rate or walking pace by merely pitching her laugh or faking a sprint. There was a statutory air of nonchalance about her. This absence of restraint was at once a mesmerizing and terrifying spectacle to witness. Powerless to question her legitimacy, you were compelled to observe her strange habits in silence.
The title of my story is Today I Am Riding Alone. On my 5th birthday, The year we moved to Mile 4, my dad got me a new bicycle and the bicycle got me a new friend. Every morning, tea was at our gate. Breakfast in hand, he would call on me to come out with my bicycle so we could go for a ride. For a few months, we met every morning in front of our house, riding and falling around our small stony yard, until one day, the bicycle decided it was tired of our religious mountings and broke itself down. My mom gathered its pieces and packed them in a store. In Mile 4, houses do not take orders like military men standing at attention in lines with clear-cut aisles. They stand haphazardly, like children at the amusement park, some standing tall, some laying on their bellies, some naked, while others face each other making jokes or preparing for a fight. They stand haphazardly, like a lazy farmer had, in a hurry, scattered house seeds on his land. And now, every house sprouted and grew the way it knew how. Shanties near bungalows, near mansions, near shanties. Sometimes, you had to squeeze through someone's kitchen to get to your front door. And since T's house was one of the houses in conversation with us, our friendship did not break down with the bicycle. At 7, I went to his house to play and we ended up fighting on their veranda. Punching of faces, squeezing of necks, wrestling each other to the ground, until Mamang, the francophone neighbor who sold foolery, came and untangled us. She yelled at us, asked why we were fighting, and then she gave us boiled corn. T's arm was bleeding. My eyes were a liquid red. My entire body ached like someone had used a hammer to crack my bones. We broke the corn into 2 equal pieces, sat on the veranda and ate together in quiet. It was the first time I fought.
Pabo was among first-generation non-natives who had become an integral part of Koto. As early settlers, they came as migrant farmers, jobbers, and caretakers for farmlands owned by elites and the well-offs. They were of different tribes, the Ewondos, Bamilikes, more of Bayangis and the Shimbis. Many had died, but their second and third generations still live in Koto. Mama had me and my siblings here, Pabo said. In those days, Koto was a farming hamlet, thick bush, footpaths, and few huts all around here, he gesticulated. His story seemed to be a community besieged by a Luciferian force. It used to be known as Coven for White Witches, believably so because of unusual diabolic maneuvers and frights. Strange voices and enchantments were often heard at obscure corners in wee hours of the night. Nobody dared got close. Those maneuvers suddenly ceased when Assemblies of God Church cited their seminary in Koto, preceding other Pentecostal denominations. That's when we started having respite even from mysterious deaths. Bible said, smiling, things are different now.
I like how everyone is keeping to time. That's
Okay, the title of my story is Childhood Memories. After weeks of anger, denigration, and insult, he will sit down in front of his wife's house and send one of my brother to buy some beer. While drinking, he will start a long monologue, call his ancestors, and tell senseless stories. This house cannot fall into despair. My father, morten on for. When he was tired, he will sit, he will call all his wife and give each of them some rice, oil, or a lump of salt. That was Christmas. At the end of each year, the CDC also offered calendars with President Bia's pictures to the workers. My father hung the calendar in front of his door and would often cycle some dates with a pencil. When he had nothing to do, he will show me the same pictures. This is Paul Biya, the President of the Republic. Have you seen this mustache? Yes, Father. It is the President's mustache. This is Kawayege Jibril, Speaker of the National Assembly. This is Peter Mafonim Songe, the Prime Minister, head of government, and this is my boss. He is a white man. Have you ever seen a white man in your life? No, Father. I've never seen a white man in my life. I was 5 years old. I used to draw Toby, a character in my brother's textbook. I also used to write some letters of the alphabet. At home, we were 3 children who were not going to school. Father pretended that we were too young to leave the house. Thank you.
Yeah, this is titled Out of the Window of a Train. I relived this journey through the small rectangular screen of a Canon camera. In this screen, the train is not just a Russian metal, but an array of colors. Silver buckets, brown brooms, yellow and red clothes, blue, red and white matted bags, smiles, stretch marks, yawns, cries, and defined emotions. It is a dizzy picture of a receding sun. Total darkness, fans attached to the roof of a train whirling, snores of humans, and dripping sweats. I tilt the camera headlong and photograph the train take a bend on the track so that our coach is in direct view of another length of the train. It is a long train, each coach attached to the other like marching soldiers. I take a snapshot, and the image caught makes me return back to my seat in a jolt. I pass the camera to Anselm in his window seat. "You have to take these shots. Outside," I whisper. He refocuses the lens through the window and clicks, clicks, clicks. I hear the shutter sounds, but my eyes have already had a glimpse and my brain processes the images. He returns the camera into the coach and we consider the images. Outside, just above us on all the coaches, there are masses of humans standing, sitting, squatting, and lying down on top of the train like daredevils. They improvise risky positions and create their open-air coaches just above us, as if reminiscing old Bollywood movies. We are riding, they are flying. Thank you.
Thank you for the brilliant readings. We have one more person.
The title of my story is called Sons and Fathers. My father's perfume is strong and fiery. Long after he's left the house, his perfume lingers as if he's left it to watch what we do when he's not around. There's no day he's been without a perfume. All his clothes are laden with it. His skin too. But my father's relationship with perfumes are more intimate than my relationship with him. I never wanted my father in the house. His presence was stifling, choking, and most times my brother and I would stay in our room when he was around. Whenever he had an occasion, we would wait for him to leave the house. I craved his absence, not in the form of death, nor a permanent absence, but the sort of absence that allowed me to do what I wanted to do. Sometimes when he was dressing to go out, I'd be in his room. I'd watch how he'd knot his tie, his shoelace, how he'd take his perfume and spray it on different parts of his body, carefully, in between his dressing up. I would polish his shoes and he would lecture me about Dr. Cole's son, who was very brilliant and had a high CGPA. He'd tell me how Dr. Cole's son was studying computer engineering and how the boy polished shoes to earn some money. My father somehow saw honor in that, in the struggle to become a man, doing the lowliest of things for something higher.
So we're going to open it up to everyone and also the participants to say a few words about their choice of nonfiction as a form to explore the respective stories they're working on. But one of the first things I would like to say and to kind of preempt the conversation we'll have is, the fact that, this group is composed almost entirely by men, which is not the least unsavory fact in a festival dedicated this year to the work of, women. And we receive fewer submissions from women, but that's, I think it's such an easy way to, dismiss the conversation. But I think the big question for us, and this goes even to the work that, for instance, Saraba is doing, is that what makes it easier for men when you release a call for submission to submit to your magazine than women? And that's like a question that I have actually, and I hope that we can ask those questions. But in the larger sense of the work we are doing, especially for the publication, one of the things we began to figure out very quickly was how do we make sure that the voices are not uneven in that sense. And I'm hoping that something productive comes out of that. The other thing I guess, a way to preempt this conversation also is to think about the lineage or so of recent nonfiction writing in English. The first thing is that both Bakwa and Saraba acknowledge the pioneering work of Chimurenga. I think that there's a copy of their recent issue here. In particular, the 3 editions for me, for instance, the 3 editions of the African Cities Reader, and also one of the projects that Chimurenga was affiliated with was the Pilgrimages Project of 2010, in which prominent African writers, I think Yvonne Uwo was part of that group, were sent to 14 cities around the world during the World Cup to basically write about their time there. And as nonfiction, which includes criticism in my mind, creative nonfiction, narrative essays, however you want to classify nonfiction, as it begins to gain more prominence in African writing, I guess one thing to take note of is that this writing has always existed. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of makes me feel like there's a lot of lazy criticism when people think that this is new, right? So that this kind of writing we are trying to foster is new. I don't think it's new. I think that there's a lot of writing that has always been published in this form, and the question becomes, how do you distribute that kind of writing? How do you make it more visible? Nigeria is Anglophone, technically, officially, and Cameroon is both Anglophone and Francophone. So English, by default, was the language in which we could communicate and have like a reasonable and meaningful dialogue with each other. But I don't think that puts to rest the perennial dilemma of African literature, which is what language do you write in? So I'm hoping that we can have that conversation at the end. So very quickly, because I think we have about 20 minutes left, I want to go around again and kind of have each of the participants respond to the choice of nonfiction as a form to explore the stories that you're working on.
Actually, I did not choose nonfiction. I had to write nonfiction, and I wrote this story because normally I write poems. I don't even write English, so I write in French. So this was an important project for me. First, because I started writing good things in English, and because I started writing nonfiction.
The fact is that I started as a playwright, actually, writing sketches and drama. Again, moved to fiction. But when this exchange started on the course of making choices, it happens to be nonfiction. Yes, in a way, I have no choice, because that's what it was then. Then secondly, I now remember, like the choice of story I made. I know that I realized that nonfiction is something you have to write something factual. And I remember the trip I made to a rural community that is called Koto. I went there in search of something wood. So I decided to put into writing my experience in those places, what I observed in that rural community, exploring, that besides, it's something that is applicable to African countries, that beyond the glamour of the cities and all that, life outside the cities is something different. Lazarus could probably something like a ghetto-like kind of life, beside all the beautiful things. So that's why I choose that.
Thank you. But you're also a journalist, so I think, yeah.
I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
Okay, hello everybody. I started out as a fiction writer, and since I work at the airport, I write aviation fiction. So when I heard about the workshop, I decided to go in And because I also work, I also write, I'm also a blogger. I run an aviation blog, so I decided that it was going to beef up my articles. And Dami at the workshop in Limbe, he said that he observed that during the call for submissions, there were many personal essays and memoirs of people's personal experiences and how they relate to society, and there were just too many submissions on that. So I decided to do something different. I decided to do literary journalism, in which I'll be invisible in the piece, and I'll do some journalism about literary journalism about our defunct national airline, Cameroon Airlines, and the style. Before the workshop, there was a reading list which we had to go through, and many stories, and I had to pick up. I was influenced by 2 stories on the reading list to come up with my own piece, Impossible n'est pas Camerounais, basically.
What pieces were those?
Blood Money, a Douala Chronicle by the Franco-Cameroonian senior researcher Dominique Malaquais, and the untold story of Silk Road, the story on Wired magazine. Those 2 stories, they influenced my style.
Well, I'm very interested in literary journalism, so I was going to do a literary journalistic piece. But then, on the day I was supposed to go do my research, I lost a friend. So I became kind of numb. My mind became numb, and I could not leave my room for a long time. And then I decided that as a means to heal, I had to write about the girl. So I started writing, first of all, as a joke, and then just to free up the grief. Then the editor started pestering me about the deadline, so I decided to do something. I decided to do something with it, and well, that was how my story came about. It was healing for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, during the workshop, we were asked to list the stories that torment us, the stories that keep pushing us till we write them. So I listed certain stories. So from that story, my number 1 story out of that was this train travel I had last year. Coming to the Ake Festival from Kaduna, I took a train. It was a 36-hour journey from Kaduna to Abeokuta. So no bathing, nothing. We were just in the train sitting. Yeah. So that story kept tormenting me. So I think I had to write that story. That's why I wrote it down in this piece. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think for me, I started with the nonfiction, starting from the Saraba nonfiction manuscript call, and I was serving in Anambra at that time, and I think I had been writing fiction then, but I hadn't given I hadn't done anything nonfiction, so I did that, and after I got in, I started noticing that nonfiction is actually something that comes to me out of curiosity because I want to explore something. And that was what spurred me to do the trailer driver story. And it's because I felt there was this one-sided story about trailer drivers that it seemed all Nigerians just had, and it was that trailer drivers caused accidents. We didn't know anything about trailer drivers. So that's what made me embark on a trip from Lagos to Kano on a trailer. But aside that, I also noticed that many of those that were writing nonfiction in the West, some of them wrote their personal experiences, of which, when I started interacting with Iduma over my Saraba nonfiction manuscript, he kept telling me that the personal is also, something that everybody can relate to. And it also goes on to say that every experience we have is valid in its own way, and it is worth writing about. And I think that's partly what has still kept me pushing about nonfiction.
Okay, for me, the workshop was very intensive. We did all sorts of creative nonfiction, and I do write creative nonfiction pieces for Bakwa magazine. But for this piece, I had pitched a Bangladeshi story, but then they rejected it because it was an excerpt of a longer piece that I'm writing, so there were a lot of things missing. So yeah, so I had to write this one in remembrance of a friend that I lost, because speaking of nonfiction, memoirs will come to me naturally because growing up, I always wrote diaries and yeah, stuff like that. So I had to go back and that just came to me. But I write other nonfiction pieces.
So people keep talking about friends that they've lost. Well, I lost a mad woman. Non-fiction is uncomfortable because it's true. If you notice, it is, I mean, Iduma was talking about how it is not really a novel thing, like it's been done before, it's non-fiction has been publishing on the continent, but I mean, if you look at other markets, other publishing markets, our continent basically is soaked with fiction, and even poetry sometimes outraces non-fiction. So for me, it was uncomfortable, and I think even the editors, it was uncomfortable for them to read about me writing about a mad woman I lost. And I'm sure it's uncomfortable for some people hearing me talk about losing the mad woman. Oh, it's not?
Well,
So-
first of all, don't speak for the editors.
Well, I know that Dami Ajayi sent back some very horrifying messages. I think I traumatized him. So, yeah.
Okay, so what I want to do now is to just kind of like open it up for the next, I think, 15 minutes and have questions that we can respond to from the audience.
My question is, did this movement, did it sort of change, affect your writing? I don't know, I know you started some pieces out in Cameroon and then you completed them in Nigeria, or you started vice versa, I don't know. Did this influence your, and then you were doing non-fiction, did this have any impact on what you're writing?
When writing non-fiction that involves people in your life or otherwise, do you change or hide the names and identities? And then have there been any situations or circumstances that have made you have to do that? Or they made you, I think you get what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
Thank you.
Before this current story, I really was not interested in non-fiction. And then in the 6-month life of this program, I have developed 2 even longer pieces of non-fiction. I'm not in a hurry to call it interest yet, because I still write more fiction, but I mean, I didn't have that before. So yes, it has affected my writing and the way I think about experiences. Sufficient?
So I think one more person should answer the question about whether the movement changed your writing. Yeah. And just to clarify, if you're talking about movement in the sense of moving from one country to the other, not necessarily thinking about non-fiction as a genre, but the actual travel by Nigerians to Limbe and from Limbe to Abeokuta.
Okay, I'll just address the first one. How it affected my writing. My sentences are now shorter, sharper, automatically. It just happened. And secondly, the piece I wrote is actually my very first piece of literary journalism. And right now I'm reading like tons of literary journalism articles and I'm inspired to write them. So that's an effect of the workshop. And about the, first of all, the travel. First of all, I live in Douala, which is a lot like Lagos. It's the Cameroonian Lagos, Douala. And ever since I started writing, I've had my Nigerian friends, virtual friends especially, and even normal Nigerians, they say, guy, you look like a Nigerian. You just have this Nigerian swag. Even Dami Ajayi said that. And one attendant in the audience, he said something like that. I think even TJ said that. So it sort of inspired a short story which is titled Lagos Boy. The first draft is still very weak, but I'm working on it. I mean, all because of the workshop.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 10 more minutes. I want to go to the next question, which is about how quickly does, how early in your writing is it tipping into the memoir? Are you comfortable with revealing personal details? And I guess that's connected to the question of changing identities that someone also asked, and maybe Socrates, you wrote about your father, or you're writing about your relationship to your father.
I know, right? Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit, it can be a little bit unsettling, and I think that's what nonfiction is let me say really about, okay, for example, Frank Marcotte, when he wrote Angela's Ashes, he said, if I had a happy childhood, I wouldn't have written this book. So sometimes it's like exposing these parts of you that, people don't normally see. And I think it reaches that point where your experience is not just your experience. And when other people read your work, they're able to connect to it. So there are some conversations, for example, we hardly have in, let's say, Nigeria, for example, father-son relationship discussions. And these are conversations that are not probably in the public as much. How do you relate with your father? Is your father your friend? Those kind of stuff. And yeah, sometimes it's not really, I haven't changed names of people. I wrote it the way it was. But at a point, I was thinking of changing names of some people so that, just to keep some things low. Because at the end of the day, you end up going back to your family. So, so I think that's that.
Okay, about that question, I would say that my own case is quite different. I wrote about my father, but I wrote without any problem because I know my father doesn't read English. And so it was quite easy. And at home, people know I write in French. They don't know I write stories. So I know that if my friends read that, they will say, okay, he's just writing what they will not know that this is non-fiction and that actually there are elements that this story is true. And at home, I'm the only person who speak and read English. So even the mother will just see this. Okay, this is another story. So for me, it's okay.
I am kind of tempted not to take that answer because someday someone will be able to read English. But yeah.
Maybe I just want to make a contribution. You said at the beginning, Emmanuel, that you're aware that it's all men up there, and we need to think about what are the barriers to women sending in applications. But I've also worked as for the Arts Council in the UK, and one of the things we also try to look at is what is it about our own structures? Because there's also sometimes things you don't understand about your own process that meant you ended up where you didn't want to end up in terms of your selection. So I think that's also a conversation we all need to have together. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can just take his question.
Okay.
And that will be it.
Good evening, everybody. My question is actually directed to all the participants traveling from Cameroon to Nigeria and writing nonfiction, the discussion about nonfiction we've been having in Africa, and it's really, really great. I would like to ask your position whenever you to write about sex in nonfiction. It's kind of different from fictionalizing characters doing one thing or the other. I can remember my time with Iduma in Benin last year. I wrote a piece. My meeting with Iduma last year, and it was published recently this year, and I was surprised by what I wrote. I had to remove some. No. After, of course, not with you. After our meeting, going back home and seeing street prostitutes on the Benin Road and all that. So I would like to know your position when it comes to sex and non-fiction writing in Africa. Thank you.
Okay, I think that a lot of the participants are talking about where they are in their writing, and most of them are making this kind of foray. So, except someone has actually has an answer to that question. Okay.
Actually, my piece is about a love triangle where I have a girlfriend, and then I have this friend who is kind of a friend, but more than just a friend. If you know what I mean. So at first, I had difficulty writing about it, so I kind of cut my girlfriend out of the piece. But it was so obvious that the editor said something is missing, so I had to bring the girl back in the piece. And then he kept pushing me. He said there is still something missing, and I knew he was asking me to actually write about what happened, like the sexual activity, maybe not the sexual activity, but it was just, he wanted me to write about what went on between me and the girl. So I didn't write explicitly that yeah, of course I would.
No, yeah, but the question is, if you are going to write about that, you know, what would be, why do you have these inhibitions, I guess?
It is just that
Not
sex,
to put you on the spot, no, but you know.
sex is kind of a very touchy topic.
For who? For your reader or
For the readers.
Oh.
I mean,
Please allow the readers to speak for themselves.
okay.
It's for you, it's not for the
No, I'm not put. I actually, does someone else want to answer that question? Have you written about sex before? Don't answer if you haven't written about sex.
I have. I think it depends on the angle you look at it. Is it sex as a memoir or sex as an essay?
No, it's everything. It's whether it's the
it's
memoir.
It's quite
or
easy to write of it, to write when you are distant from it. But if you are part of it, I think what's the difference between the fiction and the non-fiction? If you could write sex in fiction, then you should read even better as non-fiction.
I think that's a very good way to come to the end of the panel. So that's actually quotable. If sex can, yeah, okay, I didn't. But just to say that we are very grateful for your participation and your indulgence, and all of this is going to culminate in a publication that Saraba, Goethe, and Bakwa magazine are putting together, and we're going to get out more information. And as I said at the beginning, we are thinking of a way to make it more inclusive, to use that word. And we are reaching out to female writers that we admire their work and hoping that they can be part of it.
For the workshop.
That also applied for the workshop. Thank you very much, and yeah.